am a union miner, and I'll work all night and day. I am a union miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. In 17, I left my home for this country's flag.
Sit down. Hey, I'm going to be very quick. My name is Chris Garlock. Some of you, that last name may be familiar. My dad is actually a labor historian in the family, did a bunch of research on the Knights of Labor. Still around, still doing labor history stuff. I host and produce Labor History Today podcast. And so two things. One is check it out, Labor History Today, any platform that you use, you can find it. But at lunch, it turned out I was sitting next to Howard, who has oral histories that he did with retired steelworkers. So my request is that if you have that sort of labor history sitting around or something else that I need to know about, and thank you for this fabulous program. That's me letting me mess around with recording this. Please see me today. I'll also be at the program tomorrow. But I'm trying to get this history out to the rest of the world. We would love the rest of the world to come here. But in the meantime, if we can get it out to the rest of the world through the wonderful world of podcast, I would appreciate your help.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm immediate past president of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society and have been involved with this organization for over 28 years. And it is the premier labor history organization in the Commonwealth that involves a lot of very, very good people who are very dedicated to the history of labor and working people. And I commend their work, which next year will recognize the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society. So they've been doing this work for 50 years. Today our topic of discussion is Eastern Europeans and Pennsylvania labor. And I'm going to talk briefly about two things. First, about a subject with which I'm most familiar, and that's Ukrainians in the anthracite region. And secondly, I'm going to talk about a subject that's in the paper and on the news every day. That's Ukraine. And its impact historically, what historical trends there have been that can translate into what's happening in Ukraine today. It's very hard to find an exact estimate on the number of Ukrainians, my heritage, who came to the anthracite region. About 1902 to 1922 are 18,500 throughout the entire anthracite region. Most of those came from western Ukraine, from an area that's known as Transcarpathia, the Carpathian Mountains, an area that was also controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was ethnically Ukrainian, but many of the immigrants who came to this country from there, when you look at their registers on Ellis Island, they registered as Austrian or Hungarian because they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, when in reality, ethnically, they were Ukrainian. That includes my grandfather, who came from Transcarpathia, the Carpathian Mountains, and who worked in an anthracite coal mine for 30 years. Eventually developed what they called miner's asthma, which would be officially recognized in 1969 by the National Coal Mine Health and Safety Act as black lung. He died from that in 1954. The vast majority of Ukrainians who came to the anthracite region worked as laborers. They were laborers in and around the coal mines. A small percentage, about 9%, as best we can tell, when I say we, I mean my brother and I, based on research that we've done, about 9% became certified coal miners, which, as Nick probably knows, was a real distinction. That was a real leg up to be a certified coal miner. And both of my grandfathers, my other grandfather was Sicilian, they were both certified coal miners. So they were in that small 9% that actually became certified to be a skilled coal miner. The Ukrainian diaspora, Ukrainian life centered around several important things. Ukrainian fraternal societies, very much like the Slovak fraternal society that we are in today. It was a social club. It was a place where you could get insurance for things like workplace injuries or life insurance. And life also centered around the church. There were two branches of the Ukrainian church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Greek because it started in Greece, but was Catholic and was aligned with the Pope in Rome. So there were two types of Ukrainian churches, Orthodox and Greek Catholic. I happen to be Greek Catholic. In recent times, very recent times, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has split from the Orthodox Church of Russia. Now there are two Orthodox churches in that part of the world, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. So social life centered around the ethnic fraternal organizations, the churches, and family. And I can't tell you the number of times those Ukrainians knew how to have a good time. Because they sure did. Family, food, beer, music, storytelling, all of those things were very important parts of Ukrainian culture in the anthracite region, and I'm sure the same is true throughout the state in Pittsburgh and other areas as well. I just happen to be more of an expert on anthracite. Younger generations like myself, we spread out, obviously. Mining was no longer an industry. Anthracite is all but dead. And people spread out all over the country for a variety of economic reasons, essentially. I, for example, moved to the Harrisburg area in the early 1980s for economic reasons, for job reasons, because in the anthracite region, and things haven't changed a whole lot, decent jobs are hard to come by. They just aren't there to a large extent. So that's a little bit about the Ukrainian diaspora. A guy by the name of Robert Molnar wrote a book called A History of Ukraine. 900 pages. I'm going to read the whole thing to you. So I hope you're patient. What time do we have till then?
Not much.
I'm going to read two very short excerpts, and then I'm going to give you a little quiz. So listen carefully. The first universal of the Ukrainian Central Rada, or Congress, to all Ukrainian people, whether residing in Ukraine or beyond its borders. Ukrainian people, a people of peasants, workers, toilers. By your will, you have entrusted the Ukrainian Central Congress to guard the rights and freedoms of the Ukrainian land. Your finest sons, who represent villages, factories, military barracks, Ukrainian communities and associations, have elected us, the Ukrainian Central Congress, and ordered us to stand firm in defense of your rights and freedoms. Let Ukraine be free. Let a national Ukrainian assembly elected by a universal, equal, direct, and secret ballot establish order and harmony in Ukraine. No one can know better what we need than us. No one can know better than our peasants how to manage their own land. Therefore, we wish that after all the lands throughout Russia held by the nobility, the state, the monasteries, and the Tsar have been confiscated and have become the property of all the people, after all of that, Ukrainian lands shall belong to Ukrainians. The Central Russian government has refused to return funds collected from our own land for the needs of our own people, for our schools, for our education, for our organizations. Hence, the Ukrainian people are forced to determine their own destiny. We cannot permit our land to fall into lawlessness and decline. That is why we, the Ukrainian Central Congress, issued this universal to our entire people and proclaimed from this day forth, we shall build our own life. In cities and areas where the Ukrainian population is intermixed with other nationalities, we propose that our citizens immediately come to an agreement and understanding with the democratic elements of these nationalities and jointly begin preparations for a new order. Ukrainian people, your fate lies in your own hands. In this difficult time of universal anarchy and ruin, prove by your unity and your statesmanship that you, a nation of workers and tillers of the soil, can proudly take your place beside any organized nation state as an equal among equals. Anybody want to guess what year that was written?
1800s.
2023.
17.
20 or 21?
1917.
17.
Vygotsky argues that there was two periods in Ukrainian history when they were truly free. The first was from 1917 till about 1922, when the Bolsheviks overran the country and it became the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And the second was after, the second time they were truly a free country was after the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s. That's the second time up until now that they were truly a free country. I've been in Ukraine several times. In 2015, they overthrew the pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, and he fled to Russia. The popular uprising overthrew him. And in Maidan is the public square, a very large public square in the middle of Kiev. On the one side was a Stalin-esque built hotel, built during the Stalin era. They called them the wedding cake buildings. Looked like a wedding cake, you know? And on the other side, there was another building with a big banner erected by students of the university in Kiev that said, "Freedom is our religion." Freedom is our religion. That was in 1915. Now I'm going to bring you up to date. Again, this is very brief. A Declaration of Independence. Resolution of the Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic on the Declaration of the Independence of Ukraine. The Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic rules to declare Ukraine an independent, democratic state on September 24th, 1991. From the moment of the declaration of this independence, only the Constitution of Ukraine, its laws, resolutions of the government, and other legislative acts of the Republic are active on this territory. To hold on December 1, 1991, a Republican referendum on the confirmation of this Declaration of Independence, which passed by an overwhelming majority of 72% of the vote in Ukraine. Proceeding from the mortal danger that has threatened Ukraine from Russia, we believe in developing the centuries-old tradition of the Ukrainian state formation, proceeding from the right to self-determination envisioned by the United Nations Charter, acting in compliance with this declaration of state sovereignty and the independence of Ukraine and the formation of a sovereign Ukrainian state of Ukraine. The territory of Ukraine is integral and inviolable. From now on, only the Constitution and the laws of Ukraine are applicable on its territory. This act comes in force from the moment of its approval, the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine, August 24, 1991.
20.
No, 1991. 1991, yeah. So 1917 and 1991 are the dates to remember if you want to reflect on when Ukraine ever in its history, had independence, up to the recent Russian invasion. Okay, I'll close with this. I read in the paper yesterday that the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, I lived in Belarus for a while. I taught at the University of Belarus in Minsk. When I was there, Lukashenko was running for re-election. Him and Putin are like this. When I was there were student protests all over the place because Lukashenko, who was running against a female opponent who had to flee the country in exile because she was going to be arrested, Lukashenko won that election by 90% of the vote. Kind of hard to believe. Kind of hard to believe. Yesterday, Lukashenko said that should the Western nations, should NATO decide to invade Ukraine or Poland, he would station and use tactical nuclear weapons on the West. And I'll close with that.
I think it was said here about, a lot of people have talked about a pride in who you are. And in many ways, people from Eastern Europe, I remember I worked in Gary, Indiana. I worked in a small Catholic school, college, and I remember seeing the people from the occupied countries, as they would call them, and feeling the loss of culture of many people who came from the East. My experience with Eastern Europe is hitchhiking across Yugoslavia twice, through Poland, and several times, and going back to Poland with Nick and Melanie, visiting not museums and churches, but coal mines and steel mills. And I feel very, very deeply about the importance of this history. But I want to say something I think very important. Black history has become extremely well known. Eastern European history is where black history was in 1955. Black history became known to America through struggle. Struggle in the schools, struggle in the streets, struggle for the dignity of black people and their rights. Eastern Europe needs to be understood, and it needs to reclaim its history, which has been largely lost. One of the best, the most useful class I had at the University of Louvain in Belgium was Byzantine history. And this seems like a strange thing to say, but it gave me a background which I could go to Orthodox churches and understand the historical resonance of what was going on there. But I want to say Lou Martin is sitting back there, and Lou did something very important. He gave a program about 1968 in Westinghouse High School, where the black students walked out for what? For their history to be respected, for books on their history to be put in their library. There were none in a largely black school. They stood up, they got it, they got black teachers. They had, I think, only one black teacher at that time. They got black teachers, they eventually got a black principal, and they got black books, and they got black history. That's how people assert their history. The history we learned was all from Western Europe. If we learned much at all, we learned England, France, Italy, maybe some Northern Italy or whatever, but and a little bit about Spain and colonialization and all that. But we knew nothing about the East. And yet we look around. Pennsylvania especially, that's where the roots are and the complexities are. And it's a very complex and deep history with many, many layers and many mixtures. It's not simple to try to penetrate. I remember the greatest historian of Poland, a guy named Norman Davies, at least in the English language, wrote a couple of masterful major histories. And also he wrote a history of Europe, looking at Europe from the East rather than looking at it from the West, which is how we always have been taught it. And when they questioned the Polish people, when we would meet, they'd say, "You got to read Norman Davies." I'd say, "Oh yeah, I've been reading him, believe me." And they'd say, "It's amazing. Somebody who's an Englishman can understand us so well." And then they'd hesitate. And they'd say, "But he married a Polish woman." I married a Polish woman. And I certainly have a great deal of respect for the experience of the Eastern European peoples, whether it be in the coal mines, the steel mills, a great deal of the mechanics, machinists, etc. I had a PhD in philosophy. It took me 7.5 years. It took me 7.5 years to become a competent machinist and walk through the door of Union Switch and Signal and be able to cut steel to 2/1000ths of an inch. That is as equally requires intelligence and knowledge and skill and concentration as it does to sit in front of a room and bullshit about history or whatever. So I think what many people have said here is about the nobility, what John Brophy stood for, was the nobility of the knowledge of the hand, of the community, of the traditions, of the love of each other. That's the real history, and we all have it. And we really need to try to understand on a deeper level, I think, this big gap in our history, and it's based on class. The real prejudice against Eastern European history is that it's the working class, people who got their hands dirty. That's the prejudice that's at the root of it, and it's wrong. It's totally wrong. And so I'm so pleased to be here as a part of this program, to hear the wonderful talk on John Brophy and how he really believed in the nobility of labor, and the nobility of truth, the nobility of woman. That if this world is going any chance of being saved, it's because the women stand up and take more and more control. We're in trouble, folks. We're in trouble. And part of the way out of it, respect for women, respect for labor, respect for history. And I'd like Nick to talk a little bit about the book Hunky.
The book called Hunky is a story. It's a historic fiction. It's about two families that were born and raised for generations in the Carpathian Mountains of what today is Slovakia. One group moved to Pittsburgh and worked in the mills and lived in a small community down there right off the top of my head. I can't
McKee's
remember
Rocks,
which.
yeah.
McKeesmore?
Yeah, McKee's Rocks.
Oh, that's right. It was in the rocks.
Yep.
McKee's Rocks, a place I really love. But the other family was in Somerset County mining coal. And it starts out in the Carpathian Mountains about how the one quote was in there, "I've lived in 5 countries and never moved from my home." Because everybody took over Slovakia and that central part of Europe at one time or another. I mean, it was Germans, it was the Austrian-Hungarians, and then it was Hungarians, and then it was the Russians and the Polish. Everybody took a crack at it. And the one thing that remained solid was the poor peasants that lived on the land that they didn't own or didn't control. And you wonder why a group of people, Ken said about 18,000 was it, or 180,000 people came into this country. From 1890, they estimate, until the end of the allotment of citizens from Central Europe could come in, which was 1890 to the early 1920s, when they started shutting down the mines, and that they said, we're not having any more immigrants come in from Czechoslovakia or Slovakia or Austria-Hungary or Poland or anywhere else. And the story is unique because it talks about how poor they were. And I said today, I walked in this hall and I could smell the cabbage cooking, because that was the poor man's good vegetables, because it grew big, it grew heavy in poor soil. And the soil in Czechoslovakia had been used for thousands of years on these small farms where the farmers had to give a percentage of their work, their product away to the owners of the land, who went, and the owners of the commercial properties. So they knew what poverty was. When the coal companies threw them out in the streets and they had to live in tents, the Slovaks and the Hungarians and the Polish, they understood that. They also understood what oppression was and why it was so necessary to form union with brothers and sisters, to haul themselves through the catastrophic times of 1923. Think about it, 1923, everybody called it the Roaring Twenties. What the hell are we living through right now? 2023. Look what's happening in our world right now today. I mean, history repeats itself, ladies and gentlemen, it does. It's a sad thing, and the reason why it repeats itself is because we, workers, don't take advantage of the power we have. We need to start working in solidarity to make this a better nation and a better country. You wonder why. I didn't expect that. But you wonder why, what's going on. It's just crazy, but there is light. There is light out there. I did a little research through the 13th Congressional District the other day, looking at who was in the Democratic leadership of the political parties in the 13th Congressional District, because that's where my congressman is now, 13th District. It's been changed so many times, sometimes I get confused, because at one time, not too long ago, right across the street in my house, right across the highway, was in one congressional district, and on my side of the house, I was in another congressional district. But when they moved it around, the law said, the lawyers and the judges said, now you're now in the 13th Congressional District. I took a look at it to see who is actually in control of the political parties. I'm really proud to say the vast majority of the Democratic leadership in the 13th Congressional District at this time is controlled by women. I love it. I mean, those are the people that should be in charge of the politics of this country. I mean, who knows more about controlling the almighty dollar? Who knows more about making food stretch? It's a really good book, and I want to thank everybody that came here today. We have one other important piece of business today. We have people who we're going to honor today for their dedication and commitment to the labor movement, and we should get on with that process and let this old dumb coal miner kind of wallow back here in his chair and smile, because I'm glad you're here, because I hope to God you've learned something here today. If not, a thing of education you got to learn and talk to the person that sits beside you at the table or across the table from you, and learn a little bit about their lives and their desires and hope for the future. This is, this is an open mic. So anybody that wants to come up here and talk, we have one.
I just want Charlie to hold up Millie's book and mention.
The Miners of Windber, I think most people here know of it, a very important book. We really want to honor Millie very much for what she did, and her health is very poor. She's really struggling, but she is here in spirit, and we're so happy that we have it being filmed so that she can see it. And I know she loved this town. Mine 40 was where her heart has always been, and she came back to this town from the south, and she wrote this book. It's an act of love. It's the story of the Miners of Windber. It can be got through Penn State Press.
And this is now also an open mic. Does anybody want to talk or any
questions? Real quick, I don't need an open mic, but James Michener, the author, he wrote the book Hawaii. He also wrote a book Poland.
Yes.
And it's about the history of Poland. It's a novel. It's not all history. But he was so taken with the country and with the people that he wrote a book Poland. And some of the central characters in the book are women.
Yeah. There
are two women that set out from Poland and came back with horses and things like that. And they didn't get to keep all the horses, but it's a thick book, but it's a good read. And The Miners of Windber is a wonderful book.
Thank you.
There's also a book on Eastern European immigration to Johnstown. Eva Moroska wrote it, and she did her doctoral dissertation on it. And it's called For Bread with Butter. And it's really, and it hits all the Eastern European ethnicities.
Thank you.
Opportunity to learn from the history of what this has been shared today. in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's known as the poorest small city in Pennsylvania. The people are impoverished. And if we don't address the unmet needs of the impoverished, which were, we understand here now, the workers, and they were deliberately kept impoverished to feed a system that now we know is very sick. And in the book, a modern book called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate, he talks about this disease, and he says that sickness and illness is a normal response to disease. So when we look at how much sickness there is in our country, without looking at this disease that lacks morality, that lacks respect, that lacks responsibility, then it's no wonder that we're all using medications or drugs to cope with that disease. I'm involved with a project called Reimagine Cambria and Blair Counties, Visioning Sustainable Communities, underscored by public health, well-being, and safety. I think this is an opportunity to capitalize on the history of labor and capitalize the citizens that know better in the communities to work on resolving the underlying conditions of this disease. So if you go on the League of Women Voters website, you can read about this project, and I hope you will get involved by going to Fair Districts PA, the League of Women Voters, and looking into how you can help, because we want to live while we're doing these kind of things.
Okay, another book, I don't know if, I guess most of you have probably heard of, is Patchtown 40, about the coal miners' strike in 1923, written by Damian Dressick. I don't know if he was invited here today, but, well, okay, I did message him and let him know about it. I have my own book looking at Johnstown, PA by the numbers, and looking at the recent county health rankings that came out. I mean, Cambria is about 64th out of 67 counties. Okay, unfortunately, I don't remember off the top of my head where Somerset is, but still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, all kinds of folks.
I just want to say one more thing. I don't think I need a mic. There's a war in Ukraine right now. I have to say something because half my family came from there. Probably not the same family as yours did. I'm the product of a German Lutheran and a Ukrainian Jew, so I really am crazy. But there is, in fact, a war going on in Ukraine now that is killing good people, and we have to learn to unite across all sorts of barriers we never thought were important before to protect them and therefore ourselves. My family left there in 1891 because of pogroms that happened there. And then I thought, oh, I must have a lot of second cousins in Ukraine. I hope they're okay. And then I realized Hitler probably killed them. Okay? So we need to cross barriers where we are, when we are, because shit's coming down, folks. We got to fight. Thank you.
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
I do have a teacher voice, but I'll try this, and I'll try not to get emotional. I'm a retired teacher, and I think back to the things that I said in my classroom that I would get in trouble for today. And the books that I brought to the children, and the movies that I showed them. Just the other day, a movie that I showed to my kids about Ruby Bridges got pulled off because the people that are controlling the local schools, those of us who don't agree with them have to get involved. I shudder to think what my colleagues are going through now and who would decide to be a teacher in these days and times. It's not just in Florida, it's all over the United States. I mean, I taught labor history to 10-year-olds. There was a picture of children coal miners in the textbooks. Those aren't going to be there anymore. unless those of us who can deal with the problems on the local level, because that's where the crap is happening. Thank you.
You're in a very historic town of labor history, and as Charlie said, Millie's book, The Miners of Windber, Our Struggle, we're commemorating the centennial of a horrific strike, 16 months from 1922 to 1923. And you get very caught up in of the emotion of it. Being evicted, living in tents. I was able to be at the Blair Mountain commemoration and go into the museum in Matewan. Same situation all over Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. We want to hold Millie up in prayer and pray for her recovery. And this book is available, as Charlie talked about, Penn State print on demand with a new ISBN number. And I want to also talk about, we commemorated this on the Labor Day of 1922 at Bantley Place, which is where these miners of the farm that they gathered for their organization were able to rent that space. We will also be gathering Labor Day of 2023, this Labor Day for the centennial, September 4th, if you're able to make it. And we will, as everyone has brought it, tell the story of the immigrant miner, our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, grandmothers, and their struggle. Thank you all for being here, and we will be at the marker, the historic marker soon. Another group of researchers, David Lauder and his daughter Anna Lauder, are putting together what's called the Windber Project. They have a Facebook page and a website, and they're working closely with Millie, but both David also has some conditions that he's overcoming, and his daughter Anna is carrying that on. So we would like to direct you to their sites as well.
Stephanie Dumight, come up. My favorite steel worker. River ran red. The river ran red.
Well, I am here. Where's our, oh, we have her, good. We have Kipp again.
Yeah.
Kipp Dawson
This
on
is
the...
technology at its best.
So I'm here to introduce the winner, the recipient. We had a big lottery and she won. The recipient of the Mother Jones Award this year. And I just want to say that I got to know Kipp Dawson when we were in Chatham College, it was Chatham College then, together I took a course, I was going to be an elementary school teacher. Of course, after the first course, I realized I couldn't work with the young kids like she could. But Kipp and I were in class together, and we got to know each other. And she, in her 50s, got a teaching degree and did a whole career in teaching in public schools in Pittsburgh. But that career in the public schools in Pittsburgh was preceded by years of struggle and years of work for the movement, for working for justice. Well, she worked 13 years in the coal mines, but she, let's see, as, I don't think it has on here which coal mine she worked in. Do you know?
No, I don't. She was in Pittsburgh, down in the Pittsburgh area.
Oh, mine 84, says Charlie, and I think we'll hear from Kipp about that in a minute. But among her notable, she's been an activist for much longer than most of us have thought about that. She's been building coalitions on the front lines of the civil rights movement, the Vietnam anti-war movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQIA+ movement, the labor movement, and educational justice movement. This is a woman who has really done the work of the movement over the course of her career, and she continues to be active. She's a voice for justice and a well-educated, loud, and important voice in our Pittsburgh movements for justice. She turned me on to, she showed me a website that has been, a Pitt student has been working on that that tells me things I had no idea that she was working on. She's had an astonishing career. She co-founded the first civil rights club at Berkeley High School in 1960 in solidarity with the student sit-in in the South. She co-organized the free speech movement at San Francisco State College. She organized and was arrested in 6 large-scale sit-ins, bringing an end to the all-white employment practices in San Francisco, led by the Ad Hoc Committee to End Discrimination, and served 29 days in jail. She co-founded the Vietnam Day Committee in Berkeley with Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman, started the Vietnam Day Committee at San Francisco State College. I mean, this does literally go on and on, but I think it's really important to understand that she's become for us someone who has crossed a number of lines, has worked tirelessly for justice in so many aspects of our community and our interests. So,
would you like to read that to her?
So here I want to present Kipp from the Pennsylvania Labor History Society, the Mother Jones Award for Kipp Dawson's effort as a union member, educator, and activist, promoting social justice, racial equality, and the rights of all working people. So Kipp, here you are, girl. I think we have an opportunity to hear from Kipp. You ready, Kipp?
Yeah, I am as ready as I'll ever be. Thank you so very much, Steffi, for that presentation. This is a huge honor, but I have to say it's an honor that especially is coming home to me after listening to today's programs here. I have always said, and I will always say, that I have been very lucky to be picked up by the waves of history that we've been talking about here today and being a part of so many amazing things. But there's one thing that has come home to me amazingly strongly today, listening to you, and that is that my roots in this country, in the United States, are the same as those that you're talking about here, from Eastern Europe, around the same time that we have been talking about today. My grandparents were Jews who fled to the United States right around the beginning of World War I in order to escape the pogroms and the drafting into the Tsarist army from Poland, where my grandparents are from. And they came here on time to be a part of the things that we are commemorating right now. The union organizing drives that were happening in Pennsylvania, they settled in Erie, my grandparents did. And they were buoyed by the Russian Revolution and the changes that were going on in Europe in a positive sense in their way. But my grandmother's husband was an organizer too. As Lou Martin's there, he can tell you more about this too. He helped me to learn more about this and looking into things. One of the things that my grandparents were very involved in was organizing solidarity with the United Mine Workers and the miners who were trying to organize not only in Pennsylvania, but including in Pennsylvania, the ones that we have been talking about and commemorating here. I don't know that my grandparents ever were in Windber, but they lived not that far away. And because of their activities and because my grandparents were socialists and because they were Jews and because the Ku Klux Klan and others were organizing against our people, he was assassinated in 1922 in Erie, Pennsylvania, because he was a part of the same things that you all are celebrating, and because he was a Jew, and because he was an immigrant. So it's what Steffi says is true. I have been extraordinarily lucky in my life to carry forward what my grandparents were working on, the solidarity among human beings that has taken the form of so many struggles, that some of which we have won and some of which we have lost, but in all of which we have been carrying these things forward. So I very humbly thank you all for this honor and accept it in the name of everybody that we have been talking about today and whose names we'll never know. All of those who have stood up together for women, for immigrants, for black people, for Jews, for the Eastern European hunkies whose stories still have to be told, and I agree with Charlie McCollester and everybody on that too, for everything that this gathering here today is standing for, and for all the work of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society and all of those who are gathering our history, for my sister Lisa Parnell Christensen, who is being buried today too, for all of us as the struggle continues. I am overwhelmed and deeply grateful, and I hope that some of what I'm hoping to get across is here. This is a gesture of extraordinary solidarity, just as is the gathering that's happening here today and the one that will happen tomorrow. So with deepest gratitude, I am thanking you all. And thank you, Stephanie, for being such a good presenter.
I'm here, I'm very honored to present the John Brennan Award for Worker for Labor Education, and also the Irwin Marcus Award for Workers Education. I know those are kind of the same thing, but they are two distinct awards. John Brennan was one of the original founders of this organization, and I never met him, but Charlie tells me he was known for his big, flamboyant handlebar mustache and for his grand oratory style, which was especially appreciated in graveyards at memorial ceremonies.
The greatest graveyard speaker in labor history. He could make the stones weep.
There you go. I think Irwin would disagree with you, although he never heard him. I think he would say Paul Fuller was the greatest graveyard speaker, maybe the greatest funeral orator. Anyway, that's about all I know about John Brennan, but he worked tirelessly for this organization and for workers' rights and for in education. Irwin Marcus is my late husband, who was, by the way, I had enough sense to marry a Polish man, right? Polish Jew, and whose family came to this country by a very interesting story, which I'm not going to tell you. But he was an amazing educator. He overcame really a lot of his own issues. I think today he would be considered on the spectrum. He was definitely on the spectrum, there's no doubt about that. And so he did his own thing, but it was in a day and time where you could do your own thing. And when he was in high school, he got bored in a class and he just thought it was pointless, he would just get up and walk out and leave the school and go to the library and get a book and start reading. And I've got books at home. He outlined every biography in the Allentown Library. Went to college, was able to get through, not with a great GPA, went on, got a PhD at Lehigh, finally was, settled into the one thing he really was interested in. And his degree actually was in, his first degree was from Penn State in economics, and his second degree was also in economics and kind of labor. I'm not really sure what it was in. Economic history, the history of economic thought. And so he came to IUP in 1965 and taught there for 37 years and retired in 2002. He was always interested in the underdog. He did all kinds of amazing research. He taught the first labor history class at IUP. He taught the first African American history class at IUP. He encouraged one of his colleagues and helped her develop the first women's history class at IUP. And he used to talk about how the most rewarding thing about his teaching was to see the children of coal miners and grandchildren of coal miners who would start out in labor history classes with their heads kind of bowed, sit up straighter, and by the end of this semester be incredibly proud of their heritage. And so he worked, so tirelessly for public education, for public recognition of workers' activities and of their accomplishments, and never ever gave up. He had a very distinctive style of teaching. Everything was in threes. And people would say, oh, I just gave the best Irwin-esque speech because it would have 3 parts. And, but anyway, so I'm very happy to award this to John Lepley, who actually was Irwin's absolute favorite student ever. I have to say, I had a student at the time who was working on a senior thesis with me, and John was working with Irwin. And in one single day, it was in the summer, my student called me on the phone and said, I have spent 2 hours in the library today reading microfilm newspapers, and I didn't find a thing. I think I need a new topic. And I thought, maybe you need a new career. Then John came through to see Irwin, and after John left, Irwin said, I have a rule of thumb that when I'm working with a student, if they're doing their research within 6 months, they should know more than I do about the topic. I've been working with John for 2 months. He knows more than I do about the topic. And I said, you want to trade students? And he said, no. So he's always very proud of you, John. He would be so proud of what you've done. John has been 13 years with the steel workers in their education department doing labor education. He doesn't have Kipp's long track record, but he's just getting started. He's just a baby boy. And he's coming along. But I'm so pleased to be able to give him this award today. All right, am I supposed to read this?
I just wanted to add, he was the best grad student I ever had.
What did you say?
Best grad student I ever had.
There you go.
Best grad.
My husband had Parkinson's, and he was very sick for many years before he died. And this young man came to visit him all the time. And as busy as he was, and with his 2 young children, and Gus and Lincoln, I hope you are so proud of your dad. You should be very, very proud of him. He's a good role model for all of us, and especially for you boys. All right, I'll read this. When dreams may grow as young vines planted in the spring, their roots thrust down in deepest soil of truth, till workers all the fruits of understanding bring, born from our borders in the hands of youth. This is Hilda Smith, founding mother of workers' education. It says, freedom doesn't come like a bird on the wing. You've got to work for it, fight for it, day and night for it. And every generation has got to win it again. Pass it on to your children, brother. Pass it on to your children, sister. That's a song from the film, The Inheritance. So this award is for outstanding efforts for education and training for union members at the United Steelworkers and promoting our rich labor history. Congratulations.
So I learned something earlier that I actually have a lot in common with Nick Molnar, and it's not height. Elizabeth talked about Nanny Glow earlier, and that's where my grandfather was born in 1926. The 2004 historical marker dedication in Rossiter, my great-grandmother was born there in 1908, so we share Chautauquas in our bloodstream.
Chautauquas.
He played Windber in football.
Yeah, and excuse me, father and sons plug your ears. I got my ass kicked by them. So it's nice to be here under much nicer circumstances. So there's 3 people in this room who've played a huge role in the path I took. Elizabeth Ricketts, she was the first history professor I had at IUP way back when, and Charlie McCollester, and definitely Irwin Marcus. Just show of hands, how many of you knew Irwin? Yeah, so look, Irwin was, all the things Elizabeth said. He was an incredible historian. There are books published today, and you will see them cite his doctoral dissertation, which was unpublished, on the Knights of Labor. There's a new book out about the Wobbly organizer Ben Fletcher. There's an article cited in there that Irwin wrote in the 70s. And there's another recent biography of the Afro-Caribbean intellectual Hubert Harrison, and Irwin wrote an article on him in the early 70s. I mean, no pun intended, but as a historian, he was ahead of his time. But I think if everyone who raised your hands, you probably didn't know Irwin so much as a historian, but as a teacher. And he was the best. He was approachable, he was funny, he was informative, and I think at a place like IUP where the students are often first-generation college students wondering, do I belong here? A teacher like Irwin, Elizabeth, and Charlie can make all the difference, and I hope I'm doing that with the steelworkers. So I'm grateful to this organization. Irwin, as always, will be in my heart, and have a good day, everyone.
Is a friend of mine, so I get to in a way kind of roast her and congratulate her and honor her at the same time. 1977 was the Johnstown flood.
Yeah, moved
That was on July 19th, so I know it was in the fall of 1997 because that's when Miners for Jobs was formed.
Okay.
Yeah.
77. No,
Yeah, 77.
No, we didn't move to Cambria County until 78.
And the reason why I bring that up, and I'm not going to stand here and argue with them, my wife said I should be careful what I say about Amy, but I can always say the truth, so.
Please don't.
Well, I mentioned it, the Johnstown flood. 84 people were killed, hundreds of businesses were destroyed, coal mines and steel mills were flooded, mining and steel companies were making decisions that were going to have even worse long-term, long-range devastation and heartbreak on the surrounding communities. This building here we're in right now, there was 3 feet of water on the first floor of this building. So we're under 12 feet of water right here, right now. Amy, the one thing we did form out of that group, and it was a kind of a radical group, out of all that mud and slop and debris, there was a group called Miners for Jobs. And that's where I first met Amy, as I said. We fought, we begged, everything we could think of to try to save our communities and our jobs. I mean, it was devastating here. She was one hell of a hard worker. She was brash. She was opinionated and deeply cared about people. She organized a group of women and men to form Miners Community Food Pantries. She and her organization established food pantries throughout not only Cambria County and Somerset counties, but also the surrounding areas, and served all dislocated workers. These food pantries not only provided supplementary food, they provided a network of communications that brought people together in solidarity during one of the worst times of their lives. Amy moved on with her life in 1984 and went to work for the Communication Workers of America, organizing Ohio State workers. In 1986, she moved on to work for the Service Employees Union, 1199P, servicing nursing homes. In 1987, 89, she went to work on a job search program where she designed, wrote, obtained funding for dislocated workers and helped write resumes, did job searches, and more importantly, explained to workers that being laid off was not their fault nor their unions. In 1989 through 1997, she went to work for the Service Employees International Union. At this time, with local union 668 as a business agent, organizer of state, county, and nursing home workers. She transferred to the Service Employees International Union 595 as an organizing director for public workers, janitors, and healthcare workers. In 2002 through 2013, she went to work for the ALF-CIO Organizing Institute in Washington, D.C., mostly doing recruit assessment and training of organizers nationwide for all industries. John Lepley was a product of that program too. And I'm proud to say that both of them are from Somerset County and live in Somerset County, not from, but live in Somerset County. Amy supposedly retired. She is active in the Northern Somerset County Women's Democratic Club, has organized local community citizens groups to protect the local environment from an overzealous coal stripping company and cost them a lot of money. And indeed, it is a great pleasure and with honor in presenting her the William Sylvis Award to this hard-working, brash, opinionated unionist. The William Sylvis Award, Pennsylvania Labor History Society, the William Sylvis President of the Molders Union and National Labor Union, was the champion of the unity and solidarity of all workers regardless of race or gender. Presented to Amy Niehouse.
It's on, can you hear me? I'll make it real quick. I want to thank everybody I've ever worked for, especially Rosemary. But I would also like to thank all of the workers that I've ever talked to, because you learn something from every one. Union organizing is not magic. It's a lot of listening. It's not sales pitch. You listen, you understand what people's lives are like, you help them understand how they can change that. So if there's anybody here, I have all this wonderful training that people gave me. If you know anybody who wants to talk about organizing a union where they are, I'd be more than happy to have coffee with them and hook them up with somebody who's still working. Okay. And as far as the strip mine goes, how many of you have ever heard of Clear Shade Creek? Okay. Beautiful, pristine wild trout stream. How many of you have ever heard of Spruce Run? Also a naturally reproducing wild trout stream that goes through my backyard. Today's the first day of trout and I'm not out there, so, but I just had a conference call with DEP trying to protect the headwaters of Spruce Run. It goes through my property, that's what he was referring to. Actually, God has a sense of humor, and she is funny, because I was fighting to protect the creek at the bottom of Hill 34. It turns out when they got over to that side of the hill, there wasn't as much coal as they thought there was going to be. We wound up saving them money. Oh, well. Thank you very much, but mostly I want to thank all the people I've had the pleasure and the honor to work with, rank and file workers, everything from physicists at Berkeley to nursing home workers. All have a lot in common. And I don't know that our new generation is ready to pull them together yet, so we better get busy. Thank you.
You go to the marker up here in the center of town. If you go out this street here and make a left, you'll end up right in front of it. It's only a block and a half away.
I am a union miner, and I'll work all night and day. I am a union miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. In 17, I left my home this country's flag. I fought the war. By 21 in my hometown, hey, I weren't welcome in the Legion Hall no more, because I am a Union miner, and I'll mine your coal for Union wage. And for that wage, I'll lay my life when I march down from Marmet, armed with my Colt and Winchester, a red bandana tied about my neck. I am a Union miner.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you all, or most all of you, tomorrow in Lilly, Pennsylvania, where we'll be talking about the KKK and the repercussions of what's going on with that little issue in this neighborhood. And I hope Kipp and Dawson is going to be able to be with us again tomorrow. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. I hope you all learned a little something. And I hope you have something to carry back home with you to share with your friends, family, and children.